Hello and welcome back to another Patreon exclusive video. I have a message here from one of my female patron supporters. So let's go ahead and read that. Just a reminder, if you're seeing this, it's because you've paid for it. This content is not available for the public. It's only for you, my Patreon supporters. So this is exclusive. And I have not read this email, so everything that you're going to see is completely authentic and off the cuff. So here we go. Dear Alexander, first of all, thank you for your great content. I think your message is very important, and you can talk about the psychology of women extremely well. Critical enough to be helpful, but also very empathetic. Good job. That's just lovely. What a nice compliment. That is exactly what I'm hoping to do, to be critical enough to be helpful, but also empathetic. That perfect summation. It's so nice when you intend something to be received, and it is received in the exact way that you intended. Just makes you feel like less alone in the universe. It's like, man, my motives are so clearly visible to people. This is fantastic. I would like to share some thoughts if you have time. By the way, sorry for my English. It's not my first language. No worries. We'll see how we go. I just watched your current video and I totally understand your opinion about life coaches. Okay, so she's referring to a video where I go on I get a bit unhinged, a pretty long rant about what I don't like about life coaches. And in case you didn't see that, it's because I haven't seen good life coaches. I've met lots of people who say that they're life coaches, and I think, I wouldn't pay any of you for any advice, and I don't really like the whole kind of industry. But my full thoughts are in a different video. You have to check that out if you want to know that. Still, I think it's a little black and white to say only clinical psychology is worth it. I have good experiences with art therapy, for example, because sometimes it is very hard to put things in words, and different forms of expression can be very helpful. Okay, so, sorry, I got something in my teeth. I've just had breakfast. I like art therapy. So art therapy, in case you don't know what that is for people who have difficulty expressing themselves with words. Sometimes they might just create art with their therapist. And before you say that sounds sort of ridiculous, it's actually quite important as a tool for people who have a lot of shame or fear around actually verbalizing what they're feeling, what they're going through. It's most commonly used with sexual trauma victims, especially young children. They often don't have the vocabulary to even describe what's happened to them, and art therapy can be a really important tool for uncovering some of the emotions that need to be processed in the recovery from that kind of trauma. So I hope that, I'm a little bit upset, I suppose, that I gave across the impression that things like art therapy I wouldn't be in favor of. I thought that kind of came under the whole umbrella of what I was talking about with regards to therapists, but evidently not. But no, I'm very much in favor of art therapy. I'm not saying it's for everybody. I think sometimes you need a more clinical, straightforward approach. But for some people, it's absolutely got its place. I know some art therapists, and I think that the work they do is fantastic. This field is a great mix of science. There's actually science in it, and intuition. And as far as I'm concerned, intuition and common sense get more and more lost nowadays. Okay? Anyway, here is my question. I am curious about how men are dealing with their intuition. I suspect that they mainly use logic, and therefore it is hard for me to figure them out. It's hard for you to figure them out. If they're using logic, then you should be able to progress where their thoughts are going. Logic shouldn't be difficult to figure out. But people say logic, and they often don't really mean logic. So if a man starts with an illogical preposition and then follows logical thoughts from that, he could be 99% logical, but he could have been completely going in the wrong direction. I had a friend who she's studying to be a social worker, and she was working in, I don't know what you call it, like a mental health facility, people who are there full time. And she was speaking to a man who had this elaborate situation crafted out in his mind where he didn't have the reptilian part of his brain, it had been removed. And what she was basically expressing is that he started from an absolutely ridiculous, starting point. But from that point, she could actually track his thoughts quite logically, and he could express himself extremely rationally, from that point. So she was able to go with him on this intellectual journey through all of these, beliefs and concepts and assumptions, I suppose, that he'd made. But he just made this error at the start. When I see some men who are completely lost, they're chasing goals that aren't going to make them happy, they're chasing women in a way that's going to turn women off and things like that, I often think, all right, so they're acting logically, but in the wrong direction, only the last part is logical. They've started from a couple of really wrong prepositions. So that might be what's going on. Perfectly natural, I guess, but sometimes too challenging. One male acquaintance once told me that for him, love is nothing but a selection. Love is nothing but a selection. This might be where the language barrier is coming in. I don't know what that means. Love is nothing but a selection. I mean, love is more than a selection. Love is an extraordinarily complex set of processes. Some chemical, some spiritual. I ultimately think that love is real and that it's unexplainable. We can do our best, but I would say that if he is proposing a reductionist view of love, I tend to find that people who do that have not experienced love, at least sincere love, not in the way that like Ayn Rand would talk about love, where you kind of recognize the competence of another person and you sort of bond with that person at a very deep level and kind of journey through life together. So I tend to not listen to anybody's opinions on love unless they're in really, really loving relationships, because otherwise what would they know? A lot of people mistakenly think that because they've never experienced something, that thing doesn't exist. But that's a ridiculous way to go about life. In a way, I like it when someone is honest, and I'm convinced that silence and feelings, and even spiritual things, reflect each other and are not a contradiction. Yeah, no, I would agree. And if it seems like there's a contradiction, so this is mentioned in Atlas Shrugged, the Ayn Rand book, over and over again. Contradictions do not exist. Like in reality, you cannot have a contradiction. So if you feel like you've come across a contradiction, you need to check your premises. Premises, that's a better word. I should have used that before. But if you're finding a contradiction, that means that you have viewed something wrong. So you need to go back and check your foundational beliefs to see where that comes, because there are no contradictions. Not really, not in reality. It may well be that your worldview and your way of thinking of things is just too narrow, that it appears to be a contradiction, but then the fault is in your viewing of it, not in reality itself. But still, this statement sounds a little heartless to me. In my life, I have been trying to reach men emotionally. I am also talking about my father and grandfather, not just in a romantic way. But sometimes I don't know how to do it. They stay distant, and you feel like you make a fool out of yourself. Well, that's a shame. Look, for me, I think a high-quality man is in touch with his emotions. I think that the kind of alpha bro culture that you sometimes see online of like, man, I'm an alpha male because I don't give a shit and I don't care what anybody thinks and look how tough I am. I all sympathy to somebody lost in that kind of a mindset, but I certainly don't buy it. It's not true at all. Everybody has emotions. The difference is whether or not you feel them, and feeling emotions actually takes courage. So if you're presenting this macho kind of facade, I suppose, that maybe your father and grandfather are, of like, oh, I don't have emotions, like you're just a foolish woman who wants to talk about emotions. That doesn't mean that you're not on the money. It may mean that you're just getting a little bit too close. And because our culture doesn't really facilitate, men healthily expressing their emotions. See, we get the worst of both worlds at the moment, in that when the society needs men to do something, they're happy to evoke our masculinity, like, hey, man up, be a man, be tough, go and sort of do this. And then we'll also get criticized when it's like, hey, why can't you be soft and feminine and share your emotions? So, I mean, it's tough being a man. It's very difficult. But I think that there is positive steps being made, and I'm grateful for the progress of society. I don't want to go back to the past where men were encouraged to just be stoic and never mention their feelings at all. I think that it's good that nowadays men are getting more accustomed and more socially accepted to be able to express emotions. I do think that there's a time and a place, and you can't just do it, regardless of context, and to absolutely anybody, especially if you're trying to date a woman. The way that you reveal your emotions needs to be very specific, and I've released a number of videos on that, so you can check that out if you haven't seen that so far. But on the whole, I think that it's a positive thing. But your father and your grandfather, they're from a different generation, so they're just not comfortable expressing emotions, or they might not be comfortable expressing emotions with you, because you're a relative. Maybe they'd be better off with one of their male friends, their spouse, a therapist, something like that. This is where you can make a huge mistake as a woman. When I was a teenager, I thought I have to be more like a man because they seem to be so cool and can focus well on things without connecting them to people. But this attempt did a lot of harm to me because I kind of lost myself. Okay, so you wanted to be more like a man. Yeah, it's not a good idea. Look, let me tell you this thought that occurred to me quite recently. And I was thinking about what I'd do if I was raising future children. Is we have a society where we are catering to people's weaknesses. So if somebody's not good at something, we think, oh, we need to get them better at that. And we almost like we're trying to produce these all-rounders. But actually, a much more efficient allocation of resources would be to give more special time, energy, and attention towards people's strengths. So, for example, this is a very crude example, but if you've got a boy who's really, really good at maths and he's pretty useless at English, how much time is it really worthwhile fixing his spelling and things like that, going over that? Is he really going to use language as his primary means of making a living in his life? Probably not. He'll need just enough to get by, but beyond that, I'd say it's basically wasted energy. If he's a really, really genius at maths and he's good at that, why not capitalize on his strengths? Why not focus on that? Because he can specialize in his career, becoming an engineer or a coder or something that requires a lot of mathematical skills, and make lots of money and make a really large positive contribution to society. So I think that we need to stop compensating for people's weaknesses so much in education and start pushing more of their strengths. Now, the way I think of it with regards to parenting is I think if my child is a daughter, then she's going to already have the strength of feminine hormones and a feminine perspective. And so if I want her to be a successful human being, I'm not going to compensate for her weaknesses and really push masculine traits upon her. I'm going to say, no, you're a woman. You were born a woman. Let's try and make you the most womanly woman ever, like the perfect kind of woman. Same goes for a man. You know, my boy is going to be inherently masculine. So why would I spend time focusing on trying to make him more feminine when he already has the inherent advantage of his masculinity? Why not focus on those strengths? So that just came to my mind when I'm reading your emails. Why were you trying to become more like a man? Well, some women are a little bit more, geared that way and they're more designed that way. But on the whole, can't we just let you be a woman? And so it'd be curious to know, maybe you'll get to this in the next part of the email, whether or not this was because of some kind of social pressure or this is just something that you decided to do on an individual basis. We'll check it out. I guess many modern feminists are bitter because they are ashamed of their sensitivity, even though it would be their greatest gift. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. Nowadays, I'm perfectly fine with being a sensitive woman, but it is still hard to face the cold logic of men sometimes. All right, so I can understand your frustration if the only men that you're interacting with seem to have this cold logic, but I would say that it's a lot more of a symptom of the men that you're hanging around specifically, like in your life, than of men in general. Like, I'm friends with lots of men, and I wouldn't describe any of them as having a cold logic. I would say that they have a compassionate or an emotional logic as well, one that everybody can sort of take part in and women can understand as well. That's a more logical approach because it's a little bit more all-encompassing, I suppose. I'm looking for that word that means like the whole system, but I can't find it in my mind sometimes. This is what happens when you don't go off a script. You get lost for words. So I can understand your frustration, but my thoughts on that is that actually what you're dealing with is not a problem of feminine and masculine. You're dealing just with a problem in your own personal life, because I think that you need to work on finding some more emotionally integrated men. That's my basic thoughts on it. I don't have a huge amount else to sort of say, but I'd say if you're still experiencing men as having cold logic, then you just need to change up the kind of people that you're hanging out with. Men exist on a spectrum. You get men who are obviously too feminine. And I don't want to shame men for indulging in their feminine side and expressing sensitivity and vulnerability and all that. I think that that's positive, but there are some men who take it to a pretty extreme degree, and they might be quite balanced humans, but if you judge them as men, you're like, dude, you're just not masculine enough. It's not enjoyable to be around you. You're not attractive because you're just not embodying your gender enough. And then you also get men who are way too macho, and it's all just puffery, and it looks ridiculous to me as somebody who understands psychology enough to know what they're actually feeling and how it's translating onto the outside. There's just such a massive disconnect between the inner smallness that they feel and the outer bigness that they feel like they need to project, that it just makes me cringe when I see it. But if you become a high quality woman, then eventually you're going to start to filter out the lower quality people, the people who are too masculine, dare I say, or too feminine, and you're going to find the more emotionally and logically integrated people who aren't, and you're not going to face the same kind of problems with that. So this is what my suggestion would be for you. Obviously, I don't know where you're at or anything like that. I could certainly introduce you to some men who you wouldn't have this problem with, some of my friends, but I don't think that you're dealing with a problem that applies to all men. That's my basic thoughts. Hope I did not steal your time, and I wish you a wonderful day, Isabel. Thank you, Isabel. I appreciate your message. I hope you guys enjoyed this Patreon exclusive content.